My name is Helen Foster. I'm 58 years old, and I thought I'd finally see my only son happy on his wedding day. But the night before, what should have been the most beautiful celebration of our lives, my future daughter-in-law Victoria stood before me in her $15,000 Vera Wang gown, her cold blue eyes piercing through me like daggers, and said the words that shattered my heart. "After tomorrow, you're not part of this family. Michael doesn't need a burden like you anymore." For 30 years, I'd raised my son alone after my husband James died in a construction accident, working double shifts as a nurse, sacrificing everything so Michael could have a better life. And now, the woman he chose to marry wanted to erase me completely. I made a decision that night. I didn't show up to the wedding. By morning, my phone was ringing off the hook. The $1 million wedding at Charleston's most exclusive hotel had collapsed overnight, and what happened next shocked everyone. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. What time is it there? I'm curious if other mothers have faced similar heartbreak. Let me tell you how a single mother's absence destroyed everything. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of my one-bedroom apartment in downtown Charleston, the same apartment I'd lived in for 15 years. As I sat at my small kitchen table, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold, I couldn't help but stare at the framed photo on the wall. James, Michael, and me at Folly Beach, just 2 weeks before the accident that changed everything. James had been working overtime on a high-rise construction project when the scaffolding collapsed. Michael was only 10, too young to understand why Daddy wasn't coming home anymore, too young to see how our world crumbled financially overnight. The company fought the compensation claim for 2 years, and by the time we received anything, most of it went to lawyers and medical bills from James's 3 days in the ICU before he passed. I became both mother and father that day, taking double shifts at Charleston Medical Center, working holidays, missing school plays, all to keep us afloat. The other nurses used to joke that I lived at the hospital, but they didn't know I often slept in the break room between shifts because I couldn't afford gas to drive home and back. Michael never complained, bless his heart. He studied by candlelight when I couldn't pay the electric bill on time, ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner without asking why we couldn't have what his friends had. When he graduated from engineering school, full scholarship, my proudest moment, I thought we'd finally made it through the storm. Then Victoria Pemberton walked into his life at a company mixer 6 months ago. I still remember the first time he mentioned her, his eyes lighting up in a way I'd never seen before. "Mom, she's incredible," he'd said. "Beautiful, sophisticated, from one of Charleston's oldest families." The Pembertons owned half the commercial real estate in the historic district, their name on hospital wings and museum galleries. But there was something else I kept locked away in that old wooden box in my closet, something I'd never told Michael or anyone else except my best friend Martha. Inside were photographs and letters from 30 years ago, memories of a different time, a different life, before everything changed. Sometimes late at night, I'd open that box and wonder what would happen if certain truths came to light. The first time Victoria came to our apartment, I'd cleaned for hours, even bought fresh flowers from the corner market, a luxury I rarely allowed myself. She walked in, her designer heels clicking on my worn linoleum floor, and I watched her eyes scan the room with barely concealed disgust. "How cozy," she'd said, the word dripping with condescension. "Michael, darling, you actually grew up here?" My son's face had flushed red, and for the first time in his life, I saw him look ashamed of our home, of me. "It's just temporary, Vic," he'd mumbled. "Mom's been looking at other places." We both knew that was a lie. This apartment was all I could afford, even after 28 years as a registered nurse. But I smiled and offered her homemade cookies, which she declined, citing her strict dietary requirements. That night, after they left for dinner at some restaurant where the appetizers cost more than my weekly groceries, I sat in the darkness and wondered if I was losing my son to a world I could never enter, a world that would never accept me. The dinner at the Charleston Grill was supposed to be our official introduction to the Pemberton family. Michael had insisted on buying me a new dress for the occasion, but I'd returned it secretly and worn my old navy blue one from his college graduation instead. I couldn't let him waste money on me when he was saving for his future. Richard Pemberton commanded the private dining room the moment he walked in, tall and imposing in his custom suit, his wife Eleanor gliding beside him in pearls that probably cost more than my annual salary. As we shook hands, I noticed an old scar on his left forearm, partially hidden by his gold watch, and something flickered in my memory, but Victoria's voice cut through my thoughts. "Everyone, this is Michael's mother, Helen," she announced to the other guests, her siblings and their spouses. Then, turning to her cousin, she added with a laugh, "She's been absolutely invaluable with the wedding planning. Haven't you, Helen? She has such practical ideas about budget-friendly options." The room chuckled politely, and I felt my cheeks burn. Michael shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Richard barely acknowledged me beyond a curt nod, his attention focused on grilling Michael about quarterly projections and market expansions. Eleanor spent the evening discussing the wedding with Victoria, occasionally throwing pitying glances my way when they mentioned vendors and venues I'd clearly never heard of. Halfway through dinner, Victoria's friend Muffy, yes, actually named Muffy, arrived late and air-kissed everyone at the table. When she reached me, Victoria quickly interjected, "Oh, Muffy, this is Helen. She used to work in housekeeping before becoming a nurse. Isn't it wonderful how people can improve their circumstances?" I nearly choked on my water. "I've never worked in housekeeping," I said quietly. "I've been a registered nurse for 28 years. Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I must have confused you with someone else. You know how it is? So many people to keep track of with the wedding." The conversation moved on, but I caught Michael staring at his plate, his jaw clenched. When I tried to catch his eye, he wouldn't look at me. Later, when the wedding coordinator arrived to discuss ceremony details, Victoria announced cheerfully, "We've decided to keep the speeches limited to immediate family and the wedding party. Helen, you understand, don't you? We simply can't have everyone speaking. The reception would go on forever." "But Mom should definitely speak." Michael finally spoke up, his voice weak. "She raised me alone. She deserves—" "Darling," Victoria placed her manicured hand over his, "we discussed this. My father has important business associates attending. We need to maintain a certain standard. Helen understands. Don't you, Helen?" Every eye in the room turned to me. Richard looked bored, Eleanor sympathetic but silent, the others merely curious to see how I'd respond. My son, my brave boy who once stood up to bullies twice his size to protect smaller kids, now sat silent, Victoria's hand still possessively over his. "Of course," I heard myself say, "whatever makes you happy." Victoria beamed. "See? I told you she was practical. Now about the seating arrangements." As they discussed placing me at table 12, with Michael's work friends, you'll have so much to talk about, I excused myself to the restroom. In the mirror, I saw what they saw, a tired woman in an old dress, hands rough from years of work, graying hair. I cut myself to save money. But I also saw James in my eyes, his strength, his dignity. He would have hated this, would have told me to stand up for myself. Walking back to the table, I overheard Victoria speaking to her mother in the hallway. "Don't worry, after the wedding, we'll hardly have to see her. Michael's already looking at positions in New York. She'll never leave Charleston. People like that never do." My hands trembled as I returned to my seat. Michael was laughing at something Richard had said, Victoria's engagement ring, worth more than 2 years of my salary, catching the light as she gestured. Nobody noticed I'd returned. That night, driving home in my 15-year-old Honda while Michael rode in Victoria's Mercedes, I made myself a promise. I would get through this wedding for my son's sake, even if it killed me. The changes in Michael started small, like cracks in a foundation you don't notice until the walls start shifting. Our weekly Tuesday dinners, a tradition since his college days, began getting canceled. First, it was an important client meeting, then a charity gala Victoria insisted they attend, then he simply forgot to call. "Mom, I'm sorry," he'd say over hurried phone calls. "Victoria has us booked solid with wedding stuff, you know how it is." But I didn't know how it was. When James and I got married at the courthouse with 2 witnesses and dinner at a local diner afterward, we were the happiest 2 people alive. This elaborate production felt like Victoria was directing a Broadway show where Michael and I were just props. 3 months before the wedding, I discovered Michael had left his position at Hartley Engineering, the firm that had hired him straight from college, to join Pemberton Properties. "It's a great opportunity, Mom," he explained over coffee, one of our rare meetings that Victoria hadn't scheduled over. "Richard says I could run the commercial division within 5 years." "But you loved engineering," I said carefully. "Remember when you built that bridge model in 6th grade? You said you wanted to create things that would last forever." His eyes flickered with something. Regret? Nostalgia? Before he shrugged. "That was kid stuff. This is real life. Victoria's right. There's no money in engineering compared to real estate." Victoria's right. That phrase had become his new mantra, replacing his own thoughts, his own dreams. The wedding planning meetings were the worst. I'd arrive at the designated location, always somewhere intimidatingly upscale, to find decisions already made. "Helen, we've selected the flowers. Helen, the menu is set. Helen, the photographer has been booked." My only role apparently was to nod and smile. During one particularly humiliating meeting at the country club, the wedding planner asked about the mother-son dance song. Before I could speak, Victoria laughed. "Oh, we're not doing those old-fashioned traditions. So outdated, don't you think?" "But I thought," Michael started. "Darling, we discussed this." Victoria's voice carried that edge I'd learned meant the discussion was over. "Your groomsmen will feel left out if we do parent dances. It's not inclusive." The wedding planner made notes while I sat there, invisible, remembering how Michael used to stand on my feet when he was little, dancing to the radio in our kitchen while dinner cooked. That evening, my friend Martha called. She'd been my rock since nursing school, now a successful medical malpractice attorney. "Helen, I need to tell you something," she said carefully. "I was at a legal conference in Boston last month. Victoria Pemberton's name came up." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "There was some scandal a few years back, an engagement that ended badly, something about financial discrepancies. The family hushed it up, but lawyers talk. Helen, be careful. That girl has a history." I wanted to tell Michael, but how could I? He'd think I was trying to sabotage his happiness. Besides, Victoria had him so convinced that I was just a simple, unsophisticated woman who didn't understand their world. 2 weeks before the wedding, I arrived at Michael's apartment to drop off his father's cufflinks, the one thing of James's I'd saved for his wedding day. Victoria answered the door in silk pajamas at 3 in the afternoon. "Helen, Michael's at the office. Actually, I'm glad you're here. We need to discuss your outfit for the wedding." "I have a dress." I took the liberty of selecting something appropriate. She handed me a garment bag. "It's a lovely beige number. You'll blend in perfectly with the background." Blend in with the background. Not stand out as the mother of the groom, but disappear into the wallpaper. "Victoria, Oh, and Helen? The Pemberton family photographer will be handling all the formal portraits. We won't need you for those. They're just for the immediate family and the wedding party. You understand?" I understood perfectly. In Victoria's world, I wasn't family. I was an embarrassment to be managed, minimized, and eventually eliminated. That night, I opened the wooden box again, staring at the old photographs, particularly one from 1994. Sometimes the past has a way of circling back when you least expect it. The presidential suite at the Wentworth Mansion gleamed with pre-wedding glamour. White roses everywhere, champagne cooling in silver buckets, and Victoria holding court in a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She'd summoned me here at 9 p.m., the night before the wedding, saying we needed to finalize some details. "Helen, so glad you could make it," she said, not looking up from her phone. "Champagne? Oh, wait, you probably prefer beer, don't you?" "Water's fine," I said quietly, though my throat was already dry with apprehension. She stood then, moving to the floor-length mirror where her wedding dress hung, a stunning creation of French lace and hand-sewn pearls. Magnificent, isn't it? $40,000. Can you imagine? That's probably more than you make in a year. Actually, it was close to what I made in 8 months, but I didn't correct her. "Michael deserves the best," she continued, running her fingers along the dress. "He's going places, you know, or at least he will once he's not held back anymore." "Held back?" She turned to face me fully then, and I saw the real Victoria for the first time, cold, calculating, like a snake assessing its prey. Let's be honest, Helen, you've done your best, considering your limitations. But Michael needs to move in different circles now, important circles, and frankly, you don't fit. My hands clenched in my lap. I'm his mother. Biologically, yes, but family is more than blood, isn't it? It's about shared values, similar backgrounds, the right connections. She picked up a folder from the coffee table. Which brings me to why I asked you here. She pulled out a check, already signed, and slid it across to me. $50,000. What is this? A gift. Call it a retirement fund, a thank you for raising Michael, whatever helps you sleep at night. She sat down across from me, crossing her legs elegantly. All you have to do is step back, gracefully. Move to Florida, maybe? Somewhere warm. We'll tell Michael you wanted a fresh start. I stared at the check, more money than I'd ever seen at once. It could pay off my debts, get me a decent car, maybe even a small house somewhere. All I had to do was abandon my son. You're trying to buy me off. I'm trying to help you, Victoria corrected, her voice sharp. Do you really think Michael wants you around? Have you seen how embarrassed he gets when you talk to his colleagues? How he cringes when you mention your little nursing stories at dinner? Each word was a dagger, precisely aimed, because I had noticed. I'd seen him flush when I'd mispronounced foie gras at a restaurant, seen him quickly change the subject when his new friends asked about his childhood. He loves me, I said, but my voice wavered. Victoria laughed, actually laughed. He feels obligated to you. There's a difference. But after tomorrow, that changes. After tomorrow, you're not part of this family. She stood, walking to the window that overlooked Charleston Harbor. I've already arranged the seating at the reception. You'll be at table 15 now, by the service entrance. Easier for you to slip out early without anyone noticing. Because let's face it, Helen, once Michael and I are married, once we're living in New York, running in the circles we belong in, what place will you have in our lives? New York? Oh, he hasn't told you? We're moving next month. Richard has a position waiting for him in the Manhattan office. Didn't mention it? Well, that tells you everything, doesn't it? My son was moving across the country, and he hadn't told me. The room spun slightly. Victoria returned to her seat, her voice softer now, almost pitying. Helen, I'm not a monster. I understand you love him. But if you really love him, you'll let him go. Let him become the man he's meant to be, not the man held back by a mother who works double shifts and lives in a one-bedroom apartment. She pulled out another document. This is a non-disclosure agreement. Sign it along with accepting the check, and we never have to have this conversation again. You'll have your money, Michael will have his future, and everyone wins. I looked at the papers, then at Victoria's face. So beautiful, so cold, so certain she'd won. You know what's funny? I said, standing up. You think you know everything about me, about Michael, about what makes a family. I know enough. I walked to the door, then turned back. You know, Victoria, there's something my late husband used to say. Money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy class. And you've just proved him right. Her face flushed red. How dare you? I dare because I'm his mother. And whether you like it or not, that's something your daddy's money can't change. I left then, walking past the wedding preparations, the flowers, the staff preparing for tomorrow's grand event. But I knew with absolute certainty that I wouldn't be there to see it. Back in my apartment, I sat in the darkness, still wearing my coat, unable to move. The clock on the wall, James's old clock that I'd never had the heart to replace, ticked steadily toward midnight. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Mom, see you tomorrow. Love you. Love you. The words felt hollow after Victoria's revelation about New York. How many other decisions had he made without telling me? How many times had he and Victoria laughed about my simple ways behind my back? I pulled out our family photo album, the one I'd kept meticulously updated through the years. There was Michael at 5, missing his front teeth, proudly holding a fish we'd caught at the pier. Michael at 10, the day after James died, trying to be brave. Michael at 18, graduation day, hugging me so tight I couldn't breathe, whispering, "We did it, Mom. We really did it." But we hadn't done anything. I had simply become something to overcome, a phase to grow out of, like his secondhand clothes and our tiny apartment. The wooden box called to me from the closet. Inside, beneath the old photographs and letters, was a newspaper clipping from 1994, "Local nurse saves college student in hit and run." The photo was grainy, but you could see me, younger, exhausted, blood on my scrubs, standing outside Charleston General. The article mentioned the victim was in critical condition, that I'd donated rare O-negative blood when the hospital ran short, that I'd stayed 16 hours past my shift to monitor him. It never mentioned his name. The family had requested privacy, but I knew, I'd always known. My phone rang. Martha. "Helen, I can't sleep. Something's bothering me about this whole situation. I did some more digging on Victoria. Martha, it doesn't matter anymore. Listen to me. She was engaged twice before, both times to men whose families had money but needed connections. Both engagements ended when financial irregularities were discovered. Helen, I think she's after something specific from Michael. He doesn't have money. No, but Richard Pemberton does. And if Michael's working for him, if he's being groomed as a successor, Helen, has Victoria ever mentioned anything about Michael's financial future, insurance policies, inheritance?" My blood ran cold. Victoria had mentioned something about updating Michael's beneficiaries once they were married, about protecting their future. I'd thought nothing of it at the time. "There's more," Martha continued. "Remember that scar you mentioned on Richard's arm? I pulled old hospital records, legally, for a related case. 30 years ago, Richard Pemberton was in a near-fatal accident, a hit-and-run on King Street. The nurse who saved him was never identified in public records. But Helen, the blood type matches. The date matches. It was you, wasn't it?" I closed my eyes. "It was a long time ago." "You saved his life and never told anyone? Never asked for anything?" "I was just doing my job." "Helen, you donated blood multiple times. You paid for medical supplies out of your own pocket when his family couldn't be reached immediately. I have the receipts here. You were making minimum wage and you spent your rent money to save a stranger." "He was just a scared kid, Martha. 20 years old, crying for his mother. I couldn't let him die. And now his daughter is destroying your life." After Martha hung up, I made my decision. I wouldn't go to the wedding, not because Victoria had won, but because I finally understood something. You can't force someone to value you. Michael had made his choice. He'd chosen Victoria's world over mine, chosen wealth over love, chosen to be someone his father would never recognize. I wrote him a letter, my hands shaking. "My dearest Michael, by the time you read this, you'll be married. I want you to be happy, truly happy, but I can't watch you become someone you're not. I can't stand by while you erase everything your father and I built, everything we taught you about love being more important than money, about character mattering more than connections. I love you enough to let you go, but I love myself enough not to watch it happen. Your dad would be proud of the boy you were. I hope someday you'll become a man he'd recognize again. All my love, Mom." I sealed it, then tore it up. He'd made his choice without explanation. I could do the same. At 3 a.m., I turned off my phone, took 2 sleeping pills, and went to bed. Tomorrow, while Charleston society gathered to watch my son marry Victoria Pemberton, I would be at work, taking care of people who actually needed me. It was, I realized, what I'd always done best, helping strangers while my own family slipped away. The last thing I thought before sleep took me was that James would understand. He'd always said I was stronger than I knew. Tomorrow I'd prove it. You know, sitting here telling you this story, I realize how many of you might be screaming at your screens right now, telling me I should have fought back, should have confronted her. And maybe you're right. But sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to play someone else's game. If you've ever had to choose between your dignity and keeping the peace, you know exactly what I mean. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you would have done in my shoes. And if you're finding value in this story, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps me know I'm not alone in this. Now let me tell you what happened when the sun came up on what should have been my son's wedding day. The pounding on my door started at 6:47 a.m. I knew because I was already awake, had been since 5, sitting at my kitchen table in my work scrubs, ready for my hospital shift that started at 8. "Mom! Mom! Open the door, please!" Michael's voice, panicked, desperate. I'd never heard him sound like that, not even when his father died. I opened the door to find my son in his wedding tuxedo, his bow tie undone, his face pale as death. "Mom, thank God. Why is your phone off? Why aren't you at the hotel? The wedding starts in 3 hours." "I'm not coming, Michael." He stared at me like I'd spoken in tongues. "What do you mean you're not coming? You're my mother." "Am I? Because according to your fiancé, after today I wouldn't be part of your family anymore." His face went from pale to red. "What are you talking about? Ask Victoria. Ask her about our conversation last night. Ask her about the $50,000 she offered me to disappear from your life." That's insane. Victoria would never." My phone, which I'd just turned on, exploded with notifications. 43 missed calls. I glanced at the screen. Richard Pemberton had called 15 times. "Michael, your phone," I said, noticing it buzzing constantly in his pocket. He pulled it out, his face changing as he read. Oh my God, Mom, you have to come. Everything's falling apart. He's losing it. He found something out about Victoria and he's demanding to see you." "Me? Why would Richard Pemberton want to see me?" "I don't know. He keeps saying something about 1994, about a debt that can never be repaid. Mom, what happened in 1994? Before I could answer, a black town car pulled up outside my building. Richard Pemberton himself stepped out, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked human. Disheveled, emotional, his perfect composure cracked. "Mrs. Foster," he said, his voice rough. "Helen, God, I can't believe it's you." Michael looked between us, confused. "You two know each other?" Richard pulled out his phone, showing us an email with attachments. "Someone sent this to me at 5 a.m. Financial documents showing Victoria had created fraudulent investment accounts in Michael's name, fake inheritance documents from a non-existent trust fund. She'd been using these to secure loans for gambling debts, nearly $2 million worth." My knees went weak. Michael caught my arm. "But that's not why I'm here," Richard continued, his eyes never leaving my face. The email also included this. He showed us a photograph, the same newspaper clipping I had in my wooden box. But this one included something mine didn't, a second photo from the hospital's security camera, clearer, showing me holding the hand of a young man on a gurney. 30 years ago, I was nobody," Richard said, his voice breaking. "A scholarship kid at Charleston College, working 3 jobs. I was walking back from my night shift when a drunk driver hit me and drove off. I was dying in the street when this woman," he pointed at me, "found me. She didn't just save my life. She stayed with me for 16 hours, donated blood 3 times, paid for medications when they couldn't reach my family. She held my hand and told me I was going to make something of myself someday." Michael's mouth fell open. "Mom?" "When I woke up 3 days later," Richard continued, "she was gone. The hospital said she'd insisted on staying anonymous. I spent years trying to find her, to thank her, to repay her. I built my entire empire thinking that someday I'd find the nurse who saved me and I could finally show her that her faith in me wasn't misplaced." Tears were streaming down his face now. "And all this time, my daughter has been tormenting the woman who gave me my life, the woman who's the reason she exists at all." "Mr. Pemberton," I started. "Richard, please, after everything, it's Richard." He pulled out another document. "This is a cease and desist order against Victoria. The wedding is canceled. The authorities are already at the hotel. She's being questioned about fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement." Michael sank onto my front steps, his head in his hands. "This can't be happening." Richard knelt beside him. "Son, and I hope I can still call you that, you're the victim here. Victoria targeted you because she knew I was grooming you to take over the company. She needed access to our corporate accounts." He looked up at me. But more importantly, she tried to separate you from the one person who's always had your best interests at heart. Mom. Michael looked up at me, tears in his eyes. Mom, I'm so sorry. I let her convince me that I was too good. God, what have I done? The morning sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the street where 30 years ago I'd found a young man bleeding and alone. Life had a strange way of circling back. Richard insisted we continue this conversation at his home, not the hotel where 200 wedding guests were about to receive shocking news. As we drove through Charleston's historic district in his Mercedes, he kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, shaking his head in disbelief. 1994, he said softly. October 15th, 2:34 a.m. I remember everything about that night. The rain, the sound of the car hitting me, lying there thinking I was going to die alone. Then you appeared, like an angel. Michael sat beside me in the back seat, holding my hand so tight it almost hurt. Tell me everything, Mom. Please. So I did. I was walking home from my shift. We couldn't afford a car then. Your dad and I were saving for a house. I heard the impact, saw the car speed away, and found Richard lying in a pool of blood. His left arm was nearly severed. He was losing blood so fast. She used her own scarf as a tourniquet, Richard added. Ruined her uniform keeping pressure on the wound. When the ambulance came, she rode with me, even though she'd just finished a 12-hour shift. The hospital was short on O-negative blood, I continued. Richard is O-negative, same as me. The blood bank was closed. It would take hours to get supply from Colombia. So I donated. They said I couldn't give more than 1 unit, but I shrugged. Rules didn't matter. A boy was dying. 3 units, Richard said. She gave 3 units over 16 hours, which is completely against protocol. She could have died herself. The hospital tried to discipline her for it, but she'd saved my life, so they quietly let it go. We pulled into Richard's driveway, a magnificent estate I'd only seen from the street. Eleanor was standing on the porch, her face streaked with mascara. "Is it true?" she asked Richard. "Is this the woman?" He nodded, and to my complete shock, Eleanor Pemberton, the woman who'd barely acknowledged my existence at dinner, fell to her knees and sobbed. "Eleanor, please get up," I said, rushing to help her. "You saved him," she whispered. "You saved my husband, gave me my children, my life, and God, what we've done to you." Inside, Richard pulled out a box he'd kept for 30 years. Inside were medical records, bills he'd found later, witness statements he'd collected trying to find me. "You paid $847 for my medications," he said. "In 1994, as a young nurse making minimum wage. That was probably your entire savings." "It was our rent money," I admitted. James and I got evicted 2 weeks later. We lived in our car for a month until I could save up another deposit. Michael made a sound like he'd been punched. "Dad lived in a car? You never told me." "You didn't need to know. We got through it." Richard stood at his window, looking out at his manicured gardens. "After I recovered, I was obsessed with finding you. But the hospital protected your privacy, and all I had was a first name, Helen, and that you were a nurse. Do you know how many nurses named Helen there were in Charleston?" "Why didn't you ever say anything, Mom?" Michael asked. "When you met Richard, when you saw who he'd become." "Because I didn't save him for a reward. I saved him because it was the right thing to do. Because he was someone's son, maybe someone's father someday. That's what nurses do. We save people, and then we disappear into the background." Richard turned from the window, his face set with determination. "Not anymore. Not ever again." He pulled out his phone. "Eleanor, call the hotel. I want every guest redirected here. We're having a different kind of celebration today." "Richard, that's not necessary." "Helen, please. For 30 years, I've wanted to thank you properly. Don't deny me this." Eleanor was already on the phone, her party planning mode activated. "Yes, redirect everyone to the estate. Full catering. No, it's not a wedding. It's a celebration of life." Martha arrived within the hour, having received my panicked text. She took one look at the situation and went into full lawyer mode. "Mr. Pemberton, I represent Mrs. Foster. I understand there are some financial matters to discuss. Victoria, Richard said heavily. She's been arrested. The FBI was already investigating her for a similar scheme in Boston. She targeted Michael specifically because she knew I was considering him as my successor. She figured if she could control him, she could control my company. But the trust fund documents? Michael asked weakly. Forged. You don't have a trust fund, son. You never did. You have something better. A mother who sacrificed everything for you and never asked for anything in return. The doorbell began ringing as wedding guests arrived, confused but curious. Richard stood in his foyer and addressed them all, telling the story of the young college student saved by an anonymous nurse, of finding her 30 years later, of his daughter's deception and arrest. So today, he concluded, instead of a wedding built on lies, we're celebrating truth and honoring the woman who's the reason I'm standing here at all. The applause was thunderous, but all I could see was Michael's face, finally understanding everything he'd almost thrown away. The celebration was in full swing when Martha pulled me aside, her face serious. Helen, we need to talk. Now. She led me to Richard's study, where Richard, Michael, and surprisingly, 2 FBI agents were waiting. Mrs. Foster, the lead agent, a woman named Agent Chen, said, "We need to discuss Victoria Pemberton's activities. Our investigation has revealed something disturbing." She pulled out a tablet showing financial records. Victoria didn't just target Michael randomly. She'd been researching him for over a year. She knew about your connection to Richard before anyone else did. My blood ran cold. How? She hired a private investigator to look into every employee at Pemberton Properties. When she found out Michael's mother was a nurse named Helen Foster, she dug deeper. She found the hospital records from 1994, the ones that were supposed to be sealed. Richard's face darkened. She knew? She knew Helen saved my life, and she still... It gets worse, Agent Chen continued. She specifically pursued Michael because she knew about your connection. Her plan was to marry him, gain control of his assets, then orchestrate an accident. She'd done it before. In Boston, her previous fiancé died in a suspicious boating accident 3 weeks after their wedding. The insurance payout was $2 million. Michael went white. She was going to kill me? The prenuptial agreement she had you sign yesterday, did you read it carefully? The agent asked. She said it was standard. Martha grabbed the document from the agent's file. This isn't standard. This gives her full power of attorney if you become incapacitated and makes her the sole beneficiary of any life insurance policies, current or future. But I don't have life insurance, Michael protested. Richard spoke quietly. I took out a $10 million policy on you when you joined the company. It's standard for all executives. He looked sick. She knew. Somehow she knew. The second agent pulled up more files. We found her communications with an associate in Miami. They were planning a honeymoon accident, a diving incident that would leave you brain dead but technically alive, allowing her to make medical decisions. I felt my knees buckle. Richard caught my arm, guiding me to a chair. There's more, Agent Chen said. The person who sent you the anonymous email this morning, Mr. Pemberton, it was Victoria's previous Mark's mother. She's been tracking Victoria for 3 years, gathering evidence. When she learned Victoria was getting married again, she couldn't let another family be destroyed. Eleanor, who'd been listening from the doorway, spoke up. Where is Victoria now? In custody. With the evidence we have, she's looking at 25 to life for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and racketeering. Michael stood abruptly and walked to the window, his shoulders shaking. I went to him, putting my hand on his back like I did when he was small and scared. Mom, he whispered, I almost got you killed. If I'd married her, if something had happened to me, she would have come after you next. You were a witness to her true nature. But it didn't happen, I said firmly. We're here. We're safe. That's what matters. Richard approached us. Helen, I need to say something, and I need all these witnesses to hear it. He pulled out a document from his desk. This is my will, updated this morning. I'm establishing the Helen Foster Foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million to provide medical care for families who can't afford it. You'll be the chairman, if you'll accept." "Richard, I can't. You saved my life with no thought of reward. You raised an exceptional son alone while living paycheck to paycheck. You've given everything to others your entire life. Please, let someone give back to you." The room had filled with wedding guests, all listening intently. Someone started clapping, then another, until the applause was deafening. But the biggest shock came when a woman pushed through the crowd, elegant, silver-haired, with eyes that looked haunted. "You're Helen Foster?" she asked. I nodded, confused. "My name is Patricia Whitman. My son was David Whitman, Victoria's fiancé in Boston." Her voice broke. "The one who died." The room went silent. I've been trying to prove Victoria killed him for 3 years. Everyone thought I was a grieving mother who couldn't accept reality. But I knew. A mother always knows. She grabbed my hands. When I found out she was targeting another mother's son, I couldn't let it happen again. I'm the one who sent the email to Mr. Pemberton. She pulled out a flash drive. This has everything. Recordings, documents, proof of what she did to David. I was waiting until after she married again to release it, to catch her in the act. But when I learned who you were, what you'd done for Mr. Pemberton, I couldn't wait. No one who saves lives should have to watch their child be destroyed by someone who takes them. Michael stepped forward and embraced Patricia. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for saving my life." "Thank your mother," Patricia replied. "She saved you long before I did, just by being who she is." I need to pause here for a moment because I know this is a lot to take in. Finding out someone you loved was planning to murder you, it changes everything. If you've ever discovered someone's true nature after trusting them completely, you know that particular kind of betrayal cuts deeper than any physical wound. I see your comments coming in, and thank you to everyone from Texas, California, New York, and especially to Maria from Florida, who shared her own story about her son's toxic relationship. You're not alone, Maria, none of us are. Please keep those comments coming. They remind me that we're all in this together, supporting each other through the hardest moments. Now let me tell you how we rebuilt from the ashes. After the FBI agents left and the guests dispersed, Michael and I found ourselves at Waterfront Park, the same place where I'd taught him to ride a bike, where we'd had picnics with grocery store sandwiches pretending they were fancy restaurant meals. The sun was setting over Charleston Harbor, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Michael hadn't spoken for the entire drive. Now he sat on the bench where we used to feed the seagulls, his wedding tuxedo wrinkled, his eyes red and swollen. "Say something, Mom. Yell at me. Tell me what an idiot I've been." "You weren't an idiot. You were in love." He laughed bitterly. "I wasn't in love. I was hypnotized, seduced by the idea of being someone important, someone who belonged in that world." He turned to me. "Do you know what the worst part is? I was ashamed of you, my own mother who worked herself to the bone for me, and I was ashamed because you didn't know which fork to use at their stupid dinner parties." "Michael, no, Mom, please let me say this. I need to say this." He stood, pacing in front of the bench. "When Victoria would make those comments about your job, your apartment, your clothes, I said nothing. When she told me we should limit your involvement in our lives, I agreed. When she suggested moving to New York without telling you, I went along with it." He dropped to his knees in front of me, tears streaming down his face. "I forgot everything you and Dad taught me. About character mattering more than money. About loyalty, integrity, love. I threw it all away for a woman who was planning to kill me." I pulled him up, holding his face in my hands the way I did when he was little. "You made a mistake. That's what humans do. The important thing is you learn from it." "How can you forgive me so easily?" "Because you're my son, because I love you, and because I know your father would want me to." I smiled through my own tears. "Besides, you're not the first person to be fooled by a pretty face and a fat bank account. You should have seen the mistakes I made before I met your dad." That got a small smile from him. "Really?" "Oh, honey, someday I'll tell you about Tommy Morrison and his music career that I funded with my waitressing tips." We sat together as the sun disappeared, the lights of the city beginning to twinkle. "Mom, I need to tell you something," Michael said quietly. I quit Pemberton Properties this morning, before I came to your apartment. I called Richard from the car and told him I couldn't work there anymore. Michael, you don't have to. Yes, I do. I need to figure out who I am without Victoria, without the Pembertons, without all of it. I need to remember who Michael Foster is, the kid who built bridges out of popsicle sticks, not the guy who sold his soul for a corner office. Richard appeared then, having tracked us down somehow. I thought I might find you here, he said gently. Michael, I received your resignation, but I'm not accepting it. Sir, hear me out. I'm not asking you to stay at Pemberton Properties. I'm asking you to help me build something new. The Helen Foster Foundation needs an executive director, someone who understands both engineering and compassion, someone who knows what it's like to struggle and overcome. I can't think of anyone better qualified than you. Michael looked at me, then back at Richard. You want me to run Mom's foundation? I want you to help your mother change lives the way she changed mine. The foundation will build medical clinics in underserved areas, provide free health care, offer scholarships to nursing students. It's a chance to use your engineering skills for something meaningful. What do you think, Mom? I thought about James, about what he would want for our son. I think your father would be proud. Richard sat down beside us. There's something else. Eleanor and I are getting divorced. We both stared at him in shock. It's been coming for years. We stayed together for the children, for appearances, for the business. But watching Victoria become what she became, realizing how we prioritized money over morality, we failed as parents. Eleanor's moving to California to be near our son. She wants to start over, be a better person, and so do I. He looked at me then, and I saw the scared 20-year-old boy I'd saved all those years ago. Helen, you showed me that kindness matters more than profit margins. I built an empire, but I lost my soul in the process. Maybe it's not too late to find it again. Michael stood, extending his hand to Richard. Partners? In the foundation? Richard shook it firmly. Partners. Though I should warn you, your mother's the boss. For the first time in months, I saw my real son smile. Not the polished, practiced smile he'd learned from Victoria, but the genuine, slightly crooked grin that was pure Michael. Mom's always been the boss, he said. I just forgot for a while. 6 months later, I stood in the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the first Helen Foster Free Clinic in North Charleston, in the neighborhood where James and I had lived in our car after giving up our rent money to save Richard. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Michael had thrown himself into the foundation work with the same intensity he'd once reserved for impressing Victoria. But this time, it was different. He was building something that mattered, something that would outlast us all. He'd also moved into a modest apartment 2 blocks from mine, and every Sunday without fail, we had dinner together, usually spaghetti with jar sauce, just like the old days. Mom, there's someone I want you to meet, he said one evening, seeming nervous. Sarah walked in, a pediatric nurse from my hospital, someone I'd mentored for the past 2 years. Sweet, genuine, with calloused hands from real work and a smile that reached her eyes. Mrs. Foster, I hope this isn't weird, she said, blushing. Michael and I met at the Foundation volunteer event last month. I watched them together, how he looked at her with actual warmth, not the desperate need for approval he'd shown with Victoria, how she touched his arm gently when she laughed, without possession or calculation. It's not weird at all, I said, meaning it. Richard had become an unexpected friend. He'd sold the mansion, moved into a reasonable house near the beach, and spent his days working with Michael on the foundation. He'd also started therapy, something he admitted he should have done 30 years ago. I've been thinking about that night, he told me one afternoon as we reviewed grant applications. Not the accident, but after. You told me I was going to make something of myself. Do you remember? Vaguely. You were pretty out of it from the pain medication. I built everything because of those words. I wanted to prove you right, but somewhere along the way, I confused making something of myself with making money. He paused. Victoria's in prison, you know. 25 years, no parole. I know. Do you feel sorry for her? I thought about it. I feel sorry for the child she must have been before she became what she is. Something broke in her long ago. But no, I don't feel sorry for the woman who tried to destroy my son. The wedding venue called last week, asking if we wanted a refund for the deposits. Michael had actually laughed, and told them to donate it to the foundation. All those flowers meant for a fake celebration now brightened the rooms of terminal patients at the hospice center. Patricia Whitman visited monthly, bringing documentation that continued to help the FBI's case. She'd found peace in knowing Victoria would never hurt another family. We'd have coffee and talk about our sons. Hers gone forever, mine saved by minutes. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said during her last visit. "I'm grateful. Grateful my David knew real love before he died, even if it was brief. He had 6 months of thinking someone loved him. Michael would have had less than 3 weeks before the honeymoon." Martha had helped pro bono with all the legal complications, making sure Michael was protected from any financial fallout from Victoria's schemes. "You know," she said over wine one night, "I ran into Eleanor Pemberton's lawyer. She's actually doing well in California. Started a pottery studio of all things. Good for her. She wanted me to tell you she's sorry. For everything. We all make choices. She's making better ones now." Today was Michael's 31st birthday. We celebrated at my apartment with a cake from the grocery store, Sarah bringing homemade lasagna, Richard arriving with an embarrassingly expensive bottle of wine that we drank from my mismatched glasses. "Make a wish," I told Michael as he blew out the candles. "Already came true," he said, looking around the small room, packed with people who actually cared about him. Later, as we cleaned up, he pulled me aside. "Mom, I need to tell you something. Sarah and it's serious. But I want to take it slow. Really slow. I want to know her. Really know her before making any big decisions. That's wise. I was thinking, would you help me pick out a ring when the time comes? I want someone who actually loves me to help choose it." I hugged him tight, remembering the little boy who used to slip dandelion rings on my finger, declaring me the queen of our tiny kingdom. "When the time comes," I agreed. A year after the wedding that never was, I found myself speaking at a conference for nursing students. Richard had insisted the foundation sponsor it, and somehow I'd been talked into giving the keynote address. Standing at that podium, looking out at 200 young faces, I thought about what really mattered. 30 years ago, I began, I made a choice that changed everything. Not the choice to save a life. That wasn't a choice. That was just what we do. The choice came after, when I walked away without seeking recognition or reward. I want to talk to you about the power of doing right for its own sake. I told them about that night, about the years that followed, about raising Michael alone, about almost losing him to someone who saw his kindness as weakness to exploit. We live in a world that tells us to network, to leverage connections, to always ask, what's in it for me? But I'm here to tell you that the greatest power you'll ever have is the power to help without expecting anything in return. Because when you know your own worth, you don't need anyone else to validate it. The applause was warm, genuine. Afterwards, a young student approached me, tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Foster, my mom is a single parent, works 2 jobs. Everyone at school makes fun of me for being poor. How do you not let it break you?" I thought of Victoria's sneering face, of Michael's temporary shame, of all the moments I'd wanted to disappear. You remember that money can't buy character, that integrity isn't for sale, and that someone who judges you for your bank account has already shown you exactly who they are. Michael had been watching from the back, Sarah beside him. He'd proposed last week, not with a massive diamond, but with his grandmother's simple gold band that I'd saved all these years. Sarah had cried, said yes, and immediately asked if they could have the wedding in our little church, with a potluck reception in the community hall. "Nothing fancy," she'd said. "Just family, real family." Richard had offered to pay for anything they wanted, but Michael had declined. "We're paying for it ourselves. Small, simple, real. The opposite of what I almost had." Now, as we drove home from the conference, Michael said, "Mom, that speech. I'm proud of you. Dad would be too. Your father always said that dignity isn't something anyone can take from you. You have to give it away. I almost forgot that lesson. But you didn't. When it mattered most, you stood up." "No, honey. When it mattered most, I walked away. Sometimes that's the strongest thing you can do." We passed the Wentworth mansion, where everything had fallen apart and come together in the span of 24 hours. Michael didn't even glance at it. His eyes were forward, on the road ahead, on the life he was building with intention and authenticity. "You know what Victoria never understood?" he said suddenly. "She thought your life was small because you lived in a small apartment, worked a regular job, didn't have fancy things. But your life was never small, Mom. You touched hundreds of lives as a nurse. You raised me with values that, even when I forgot them, were strong enough to pull me back. You saved Richard, which led to thousands of jobs, charitable donations, and now the foundation. The ripples of your kindness go on and on." I thought about James then, how he'd always said that wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touched. He would have been proud of the man our son had become, not the polished executive Victoria tried to create, but this thoughtful, humble person who understood that true worth had nothing to do with net worth. "When you know your value," I said, repeating the words that had become my truth, "the world has to recognize it." And finally, beautifully, it had. So that's my story. How walking away from my son's wedding saved his life and taught us both what really matters. If you're struggling with family who don't value you, remember, you deserve respect, not in spite of who you are, but because of it. Which would you choose? Attending a wedding where you're unwanted, or standing up for your dignity? Comment below with dignity. If you believe self-respect matters more than keeping the peace, or peace if you think family harmony is worth any sacrifice. Subscribe for more stories of ordinary people finding extraordinary strength, and remember, you are always enough.